in to provide webinar content, and I think it's fantastic that a lot of what you do is freely accessed, and the CEUs, the continuing education is free, and it's a fantastic thing. And I've been fortunate enough to do this a few times and to speak at some of the national conferences too. To give you just a little bit of background on myself and why this topic is important to me, I'm a 30-year paramedic, critical care paramedic, still work in an ambulance from time to time. I'm getting a little old for it now. It's kind of a young man's game, as you guys know. And now my role has transitioned into medical school education. I'm the director of students at the DeBus College of Osteopathic Medicine. That's located in Northeast Tennessee, about an hour north of Knoxville. We're about 2 hours south of Lexington, Kentucky. And so my role now is in the medical education world, training doctors of osteopathic medicine. How I came to be interested in trauma-informed teaching was through my PhD efforts. All of my higher education, my master's of public health, and then my PhD has been related to education. And my dissertation subject, my dissertation topic was framed around traumatic instances in your life, how those affect you later on in life, and how that trauma-informed teaching can be such a valuable tool for students who have suffered through those types of childhoods as they were growing up. And so really this webinar today is it's not so much about them, it's about you. It's about you as an educator and how you're going to be able to get through to a student who has troubles that these things tend to bring out. And hopefully we'll have some discussion later on about how we can make our classroom a better trauma-informed classroom, and how you can mitigate problems that come along with that. Okay. First thing I want to say, and I talked to Stephen regarding this, and I want to just preface this. There's a couple of clips in this presentation that have some pretty rough language, and it's due to the nature of the scene and what the scene is trying to depict. And I certainly don't want to offend anyone when these come up, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of notice ahead of time. Most of you, if you've had a background in EMS, you've had an EMS career, offensive language is something that we hear all the time, and it's probably something that doesn't offend you, but just in case, I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that before we get started. I love this clip, and I love to start this presentation out with this clip, and it simply says, every single human soul has more meaning and value than the whole of history. And what that means to me is that every soul that we're presented with, every student that you encounter, every student that registers for your class, every student that says, everyone told me to take your class, those people now become important to you and important to me and important to EMS education. And we should value the differences in our students, and we should value that some people are going to take more work than others. I mean, I know in the past you probably said to yourself, that's a very difficult student. That's a student that I dread to see come in the classroom because it's going to be a problem. Well, the reason that student's that way is it very well may be because of things he faced as a child. And because of that, he's built up barriers. He's built up defenses because of the trauma that he's been inflicted with from the very beginning of his childhood all the way up until became an adolescent, a teenager, and an adult. So keep that in mind, that every single human being has value, tremendous amounts of value. So let's keep that in mind. I looked up a lot of definitions of trauma, and I feel like for me personally, this is the best definition that I could find. It's from a study by Hawk et al., and it says, trauma can be defined as any experience in which a person's internal resources are not adequate to cope with external stressors. So let's make that simple. So basically, the output doesn't match the input. Okay, you've got so many things hitting you at the same time, and you can't process all of it because you don't have the internal resources to be able to do it. There's not a single one of you on here, nor me, that this hasn't happened to in life. There are times in life where you have too many things placed upon you, and you cannot deal with it all appropriately. And that is the true definition of trauma. We can't handle everything that's placed upon us. There can be chronic trauma and there can be acute trauma. In the EMS world, when we talk about trauma, we think about car accidents. We think about physical trauma. But what this is really more related to is mental trauma and mental health issues, because of that constant bombardment of things that you can't process, things that you can't overcome with what you're able to handle. We tell our medical students all the time, the two most important traits to have as a medical student and as a paramedic student and as an EMT student, for us, the two most important traits to have is one, resilience. You have to have resiliency to fight through problems and struggles. And the other you have to have is grit. Grit to me means that you simply can get up off the ground, dust yourself off, start all over again. So students who are very resilient and have a lot of grit will tend to always do better when faced with adversity, because they can process through it and they can travel through it. And those that don't have it seem to struggle with that mightily. Okay. So from Ziegler, he says that when we stand back and look at all the ways individuals fail to reach their full potential in our culture, trauma stands out as the most significant common factor across settings. And so if you look at people who you have issues with, let's take an inward look at ourselves and think about your own family. And I'm talking about your extended family and family members that you think may have issues. And if you know their background and you know how they were raised or you know how they were educated, all of those things, if you really think about it, if you really ponder why they are the way they are, maybe you've got a very eccentric uncle that everybody makes fun of behind his back. But if you really understood the way he was raised and what he went through as a child, maybe that helps you to understand how to get through to him and to have conversations and a relationship with him, just as you would with your students. And hopefully these kind of tools and techniques we're going to talk about today will help you with that. And these statistics are absolutely amazing, and they come from several different resources, but you can look at those and see that by the time they reach college, up to 85% of youth report to having lifetime traumatic event exposures. As much as 85%. 26% of children in the United States had experienced a traumatic event before the age of 4. And 60% of adults have reported experiencing abuse or other difficult family circumstances during childhood. 60%. Now, I was just talking to my son on the way up here yesterday. He's a dentist in Seattle, and he and I were talking about this lecture and what I felt like it was important about it. And, we were talking, and he brought up something I think was very important, very valid. There's really not a family anywhere that doesn't have some level of dysfunction. And I think you probably would agree with that. Every family has a little bit of dysfunction, and we laugh in our own family and talk about our dysfunction, but it's happy dysfunction. It's pleasant dysfunction. It's dysfunction that we can grow through and grow from. But some families, their level of dysfunction is just so horrific and so morbid that it not only you can't overcome it, it affects you for the rest of your life, even through adulthood, even through trying to get a job, even through having a career or your own family. It's been proven time and again that abusive parents raise kids who turn out to be abusive parents themselves. Sometimes they get away from that, but many times that problem seems to follow that family throughout their history. These people have a lifetime of suffering, and I want you to just kind of bear through those statistics just a little bit. The one that really speaks to me is 15 times more likely to attempt suicide. 15 times more likely to attempt suicide when you experience traumatic events as a child. 3 times more likely to use antidepressant medications. Okay. So what that says to me is that if somebody is on antidepressant medications, maybe something in their childhood caused them to not be able to process or to deal with stress in the way that many, many people do. And at the bottom, I won't read all these, but at the bottom, it says 3 times more likely to have serious job problems. I look at EMS education and I think about EMS providers, and I look at the people down through the years that I've worked with. I've worked with a lot of fantastic paramedics, very intelligent people, but then also I've worked with people that have lots of social issues and anger issues and have altercations with patients or altercations with administration. And it's because they weren't able to keep their emotions in check. And I'm probably, with all of you being in the EMS world, you have seen those people as well. And they seem to jump from job to job to job, never being able to stay anywhere very long because they wear the welcome out. And many times this can be related to problems that they were associated with in childhood. Here's the first clip I want you to see. And again, there is some language in it.
What is that?
This is your file. I have to send it back to the judge for evaluation.
Oh. Hey, you're not gonna fail me, are you? What's it say? Have you had any experience with that?
20 years of counseling. Yeah, I've seen some pretty awful shit.
I mean, have you had any experience with that?
Personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have.
Sure ain't good.
My father was an alcoholic. Mean fucking drunk. He'd come home hammered, looking to wail on somebody. So I'd provoke him so he wouldn't go after my mother and little brother. The interesting nights were when he wore his rings.
Yeah, he used to just put a wrench, a stick, and a belt on the table and just say choose.
Well, I gotta go with the belt there, Vanna.
And I used to go with the wrench.
Why the wrench?
Because fuck him, that's why.
Your foster father.
Yeah. So, you know, what is it, like, Will has an attachment disorder? Is it all that stuff? Fear of abandonment? Is that why I broke up with Skylar?
I didn't know you had.
Yeah, I did.
You wanna talk about it?
No.
Hey, Will. I don't know a lot. You see this? All this shit. This is not your fault.
Yeah, I know that.
Look at me, son. It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
I know.
No, you don't. It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
All right.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me. It's not your fault.
Don't fuck with me, all right? Don't fuck with me, Sean, not you.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
Oh my God. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Let me ask you to ponder this just for a minute. That's from a movie called Good Will Hunting, and many of you have probably seen that movie. Will Hunting was abused as a child, neglected as a child, but he had an absolute super intellect. He was solving math problems at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology that their math PhD students couldn't solve. Well, what I want you to ponder is this, and I don't want this lecture to be too depressing and too down, but what happens to any of us if we are abused and neglected as children? Many of us were lucky simply by the grace of God that we were given great parents, and our parents took care of us from the moment we were born to, from the moment we were conceived. Even as adults, they continue to help us. But what happens to you if that is not the case? And what happens to you when the people that are supposed to love you the most are the very people that are neglecting you and abusing you? What happens? Those things are called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. There's been a ton of research on ACEs and what they mean to people and the impact they have later in life. Adverse childhood experiences are potentially traumatic events that occur before a child reaches the age of 18. And of course, obviously in the clip, you saw the impact that it had on Will. Will was neglected. He was beaten. He was abused. And Will was super intelligent. His IQ score was off the chain. He could have been anything he wanted to be in life. And he was a janitor because his emotional, you could almost say his emotional neglect had crippled him so much that he could not carry on a normal, healthy adult life. So adverse childhood experience are many categories. On the right, you can see it says abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. In a nutshell, Those are the three big categories of adverse childhood experiences. Either the child was abused, either the child was neglected, maybe they weren't abused nor neglected, but they had a lot of household dysfunction. Maybe their mother was mentally ill. Maybe their dad was in prison. Maybe their dad was violent with the mother. Maybe mom divorced and remarried 3 times. Maybe the child was physically, emotionally, or sexually abused, emotionally abused, or neglected. All of these things really, really hinder the development of a healthy adult. And these are the students that you're going to get in your classroom, because I can promise you, you will. You already have. You are. And sometimes we react the wrong way with these students because they tend to make us angry because of their poor behaviors, but they're learned behaviors that when they experience the ACEs that they did as children. So these statistics are sometimes for me hard to believe, but they're there. It's from the CDC. 45% of kids have experienced at least one adverse childhood experience. 45%. It also goes on to say that 1 in 6 adults have experienced 4 or more. And what I don't have on here for you from the CDC is basically this. If you have 4 or more ACEs in your childhood, your likelihood of success is almost nothing. You will be so disadvantaged mentally because of all of those ACEs that you experience. You will never find success in jobs, find success in finance, find success in relationships, because you are so crippled by the childhood that you had. Maybe you were sexually abused. Maybe your dad was in prison. Your mom divorced 4 times. All right. And so on and on. And these things tend to, there's studies that say that we are who we are by the time we're 5 years old. By the time we are 5 years old, we are the person we are going to be. Well, if all you've ever seen in those 5 years is violence and neglect and sadness, what kind of person are you going to be? And again, this lecture is not about these people. The lecture is about you and what you do with these people and what you do to help these people in your classroom. Look at the impact that it has. Again, this is also from the CDC. The one I highlighted is the one that you need to look at closest. 32 times more likely to have learning and behavioral problems. 32 times more likely to have. That means they're going to act out in your classroom. That means they're going to be late. They're not going to show up, on and on and on. So I almost want to say, if you saw the clip with Good Will Hunting, what happened to Will was not his fault. But when Will becomes an adult, people blame him for his behaviors. But his behaviors were learned behaviors because of what he experienced as a child. So it's almost backward for us to become angry at these people because, listen, honestly, but by the grace of God, it could be us experiencing those same problems. We never know how we would have reacted in the same circumstance. Here's another clip.
What the fuck was that?
It's not yours, Fiona.
What the fuck is wrong with you?
Your mother, she was worried about you, all of you. She wanted to leave you something.
Meth?
That's all she had.
Jeez.
You don't know anything about your mother.
She was never here.
She was a beautiful, crazy, fragile, wonderful woman.
She deserted us.
She loved us.
That was love?
Yes, yes, it is.
Okay, then why did she leave?
You don't know what you're talking
If
about.
she loved us so much, why wasn't she here?
She tried. She
wasn't
always
here.
tried.
She was never fucking here. She left. I was 9. 9, and taking care of you. Taking care of all of us. I was in 4th grade, dragging your ass, passed out, in from the yard, so you wouldn't freeze to death. Staying up all night with Ian when he had chicken pox. I washed Carl's shitty diapers. I picked lice out of Liam's hair. And I was here when Debbie got her first period, not Monica. Me. And never you. You were too fucking loaded. She was a junkie and a drunk.
Enough.
She didn't love me. She didn't love you. She didn't give a shit about anyone but herself.
Please.
I'm glad she's dead. At least now she can't fuck us over anymore.
That's a pretty tough clip to watch. But again, it just brings home the point that, you know, being from a terribly dysfunctional family where the mother left the children and the 9-year-old daughter had to raise her brothers and sisters in an environment with a father who's obviously a crippled alcoholic. And so, you know, no parents are perfect. I'm a parent, have 3 great children. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes as a parent, but what I can share with you and to say with certainty is that we provided them a loving, caring relationship and environment where they were cared for mentally, physically, emotionally, financially. They didn't really have worries. Did we make mistakes? Certainly we did. But the difference is they didn't experience any of those adverse childhood experiences that many children do. And that clip again goes back to highlight that. What happens when the people that are supposed to be the people that care about you the most treat you the worst? And what would that do to us psychologically given those circumstances when we don't know any better, when we don't see any better? This quote says that traumatized learners have both social and cognitive difficulties in the classroom. Let me ask you this. Have you ever had any paramedic students that have social and cognitive difficulties in your classroom? Do you have loners who sit in the back and don't communicate? Do you have people that will never be the one to answer a question when you ask the class for a response? Or do you have people that won't show up when you have a quiz because they're too nervous to take it? All of those things may lend themselves to help you understand that these people may be having some problems related to adverse childhood experiences. What does trauma do to learning? Well, it reduces curiosity for sure. It reduces curiosity and inhibits exploration. Difficult with risk-taking, deadlines, exams, public speaking kill these people. It kills these people. They need absolute predictability. They need you to be completely transparent with them. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, and I'm going to stop for that, but they need you to be completely transparent with them. So we're going to talk about you in just a minute and what these people need and want from you, okay? These are just some of the behaviors that you might see for these students in your classroom. And you've seen all of these, but you may not frame it in a way that, hey, it's a kid that's had some problems growing up and he's experienced trauma in his life. Fear of risk-taking, again, unhealthy relationships, withdrawal and isolation. All of these we see in our classrooms. We see this. I guess if I had to, I would do it, but I can't imagine being a high school teacher these days. I just, with what you see in the classroom, what you see on TV and the things that are going on in the classroom. And it just breaks my heart to realize that I think a lot of these things are happening because of the breakdown of family structures. You know, there's a lot of kids being raised by single parents now. Not that single parents don't do a fabulous job. That is not my point. My point is we're having a breakdown of the standard family structure that we all probably had growing up, and it helped us to become the people that we are. These groups of students are at high risk for trauma and trauma-associated problems and behaviors. Veterans, current and former foster youth, American Indians, Alaska Native students, refugee students, LGBTQ students, and non-traditional adult learners. Now, my guess is in your classroom, you get quite a few non-traditional adult learners. You get quite a few LGBTQ students. You probably get a few veterans. And without you even knowing it, you probably have kids in your class that were foster kids growing up and they just don't talk about it. And you might not know that. The other non-traditional learners are easy to spot. Veterans usually will tell you and talk about their experiences. And now, you know, it's very easy to talk about LGBTQ issues now, and students are very much more open about that than they were previously. Certainly when I grew up, it was not something that was readily shared. But now, thankfully, we're in a better society now where lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, they can talk about those things freely and should be able to talk about those things freely. But again, because of that, these groups and what they have had to face throughout their lives are at higher risk for trauma than some other groups might be. Okay. I love this quote, and I will read it to you. Trauma-informed educators recognize students' actions are a direct result of their life experiences. When their students act out or disengage, they don't ask them what is wrong with you, but rather what happened to you. Sometimes all you've got to do is ask that question. Tell me about yourself. What happened that makes you behave in this way? I want to get to know you as a person. I want you to trust me. Okay. And this is probably the most important slide in the whole presentation. And these are trauma-informed principles. And I want to take these one at a time. First of all, your classroom has to be a place of safety. Do not allow students to make fun of other students. Don't allow it to happen, because you don't know how hurtful that can be to them. Don't allow students to be picked on by other students. Don't allow students to make fun of someone because maybe they don't wear the same clothes, or their hair's dirty, or they don't socialize, because these students need a place of safety that they can call home. They may not have that place any other place. And you don't understand, you may have been, and you may be the first person in their life that they've truly looked up to and respected and trusted. You may be it. You may be it. Keep that in mind and just ponder on that just for a minute. You may be the first person that they've ever had success with, and the first person that's ever supported them through struggle. Okay, so provide safety, be trustworthy. Oh my gosh, never lie to anybody, never lie to any of your students, and never tell them mistruths. But these people, just be trustworthy. And going along with that, be transparent. Okay, if they failed an exam and they're going to have to retake it, just throw it out there. Look, Sam, you didn't do well. You failed it. You're going to have to take it again. But let me see if I can help you. We'll do some remediation and we'll see if we can help you. But they love transparency, because maybe no one's ever been transparent with them before. They've never really had that in their life. If you have the opportunity to, provide the students some peer support, some peers that they can look up to, bond with, peers that may not have had the problems associated that they have growing up, and maybe they can piggyback off of that person, so to speak. Empower your students. Give students opportunities to make a choice. Make it a democratic classroom with you with full veto power. All right. So I used to teach paramedics, and I used to say, this is a democratic classroom, but I have full power of veto, and I can veto anything I don't appreciate. And do that. Empower them to make some of their own decisions, and certainly value and respect culture, sex, and gender issues. Okay. If you have LGBTQ students in your class, value those students, protect those students. Okay. Uplift those students, because it's hard enough to get through life being different. And so really uplift those people and make them know that they're a part of your classroom, okay? Not in addition to, but a part of. It's so important to do that. Now let's talk about your campus, what your campus can do. One thing you can do is talk about trauma in students in new student orientation. When you're getting ready for your new classes to come in, I know most campuses always have one of their bring back sessions where all the faculty and staff talk about the classes coming in and the new semester. But one thing you can do is bring someone in to talk about trauma-informed education and how we need to understand kids who have faced trauma are going to be different. Offer training to your staff. But the most important thing is, after today, just be aware of it. There is no cookie cutter solution to this, guys. Most of it is awareness, understanding that this kid reacts because of what happened to him at point A in his life. So it's not him lashing out to you. He doesn't hate you. It's just the way his mind works based on what experiences he had growing up. Now, at our campus, this is not a commercial in any way. I don't get any money from WellConnect, but this is one of the resources that we use on our campus. I work at Lincoln Memorial University at their medical school, and LMU, Lincoln Memorial University, provides WellConnect access to every student we have, both graduate student and undergraduate student. And what WellConnect is, it's basically, in a nutshell, 24 hours, 7 days a week online mental health therapy. If you need to call a therapist, if you need to talk to someone about a relationship issue, about a legal issue, about a financial issue, about bankruptcy, about a classmate who's giving you a hard time, this service is available to them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Okay. We also have live counseling on campus, but this gives them an opportunity to do it anonymously. They don't really have to share a whole lot, no more than they want to. And at the top, you can see it says online therapy, My Strength self-management tools, and Just 5 addiction education. So, and quite honestly, it's reasonable. For us, it costs about $2 a semester per student. And we have a lot of students. We have about 10,000 students. But that's $2 per semester that the university has decided to invest in this, because we understand the mental health issues that our students go through, especially medical school. There is so much mental stress in medical school that it's just unbelievable. And this company, and there are other companies like them, but this is the one we went with. they give our students mental health counseling access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You would get a report, but it's an anonymous report. It says how many students accessed it, what the problems were there solutions to the problem, what was the outcome, are they still in therapy? They will give any student 5 therapy sessions without cost. It costs nothing for the first 5. Now, if they need extended help, they're going to have to use their insurance and get into a relationship with that whatever therapist that they're working with. But it's 5 per episode. So if you're having a problem with a relationship, that's five encounters. If you're having problems with money, that's 5 encounters. If you're having problems with class, that's 5 encounters. So it has been an absolutely invaluable tool for us. And at first, our on-campus therapists basically were worried that it was going to put them out of work. It has done just the opposite. It's made them even busier because students are doing this first, and they're realizing how much therapy is helping them. And then they're going on further to see the therapist in person to get some one-on-one in-person help with their issues. And you would not believe the number of students use this. We have made it a point on our campus to let students know that mental health issues is not a stigma. We're not going to attach a stigma or associate it with any weakness. If you have mental health issues and you need help, we are going to give you that help, no questions asked. All right. We know what kind of numbers we have with teenage suicide now, and even suicide in young adults. And the last thing we want on our campus is to have a student who's at that point and not be able to give them support to get them over that hurdle and to get them back into having a quality level of life. And maybe it's something that you can look into. Again, they don't pay me anything. I'm not a spokesperson, but their program, and there are many others like it, their program has really helped us to reach out to our students. Because let's face it, you may be a fabulous paramedic instructor. You may be one of the best paramedic instructors in this country, but you are not a mental health counselor either. And you would have to admit that. Neither am I. And I don't even attempt to be, or I don't even profess to be. So sometimes they need the experts who are trained in mental health advising. But what happens if you have a kid that does kind of go off the chain, though, goes over the rails, so to speak, and you got to do something? So the first thing with de-escalation is watch for the signs. Look for that fidgety student who's sweating, wringing his hands, arguing with classmates in the parking lot, okay? Now, the first thing you don't do, and what I'm the director of students in our campus, what I tell our counselors and our student services people is you never mirror anger with anger. You never mirror anger with anger. There has never, ever been an opportunity for me to use anger as an emotion with a student. It's just not acceptable, okay? There's no reason for me to use anger with a student. Even if the student says something disparaging about my mother, me becoming angry about that is my choice. He doesn't cause it, I choose it. So we don't want to mirror anger with anger. We don't want to mirror frustration with frustration. We don't want to mirror anxiety with anxiety. I used to tell paramedic students all the time, when you have a patient who's critical and that patient is nervous and anxious and worried about whether they're going to live or not, if you show anxiety, it just makes that situation much worse. You've got to be, and as the educator, you've got to be the calmest person in the room. You've got to be the one that's de-emphasizing, de-escalating everything. So we don't want to mirror those behaviors. Don't get angry. I don't care what they do. There's no point in it. I tell our students all the time, life is about my reaction to what I face, not what I'm facing. It's how I react to it. That's the big issue. And that's where you can really come in. Practice empathy. And I know many of you are very empathetic. I don't think you'd be in EMS education if you weren't. And then offer cool down periods. Sam, let's go in here in the break room. I'll buy you a Coke. Let's sit down and talk. Tell me what's going on. Let's see if we can help you. Just asking for help may be all it takes. But I'll promise you, if you use anger for anger, it's just going to get worse. It's just going to get worse. You may lose a student. Heck, he may even assault someone given the circumstances. So it's just something that we want to really try to avoid. Don't mirror. So as I said many times in this lecture, this is all about you. This is what I mean by this. This is about you. You need to realize how much widespread trauma is out there. You need to recognize the signs and symptoms of that trauma and how to intervene. And then you need to respond to help those students once you determine they need that help. And maybe it's just bringing them into your office, shutting the door and saying, hey, Sam, tell me what's going on. This is a safe place. Nothing will go outside of these doors. What's the deal? Why are you behaving the way you are? Tell me about your background. Tell me about your family. Tell me how you grew up. And maybe he really starts to open up. Maybe he starts to cry. And maybe that's the moment that you can jump in and show him that you're going to be honest with him. You're going to be forthright with him. You're going to be transparent with him. You're going to be truthful with him. Okay? All of those things are important. Through trauma sensitivity, educators can ensure all learners are given the opportunity to achieve at their highest levels. That came from Cole et al. In 2005. And that study has branched off a whole bunch of other studies. And now trauma sensitivity, trauma-informed education is now the buzzword in higher education. And of course, that's where we are. So as I've said to you through this, however long we've been talking here, it is about you. And what I hope that you can take away from this today is to maybe reflect on yourself, look in the mirror and be reflective and say, okay, maybe I need to look at this through a different veil. Maybe I need to look at this through a different set of lenses. Okay. And when I have these students who become frustrating to me or don't come to class like they should, or act out in class or want to take over the classroom, maybe I need to rephrase this and rethink this. And maybe I need to try to get to know that student better and to get to know their circumstances better in a way that I can help them to do better. You know, we all want a perfect, quiet, calm, engaged classroom. And I can tell you this, in EMS education, that's never going to happen. You're naive to think that that's going to happen. You're always going to have a few students that are going to be a challenge. But maybe if you use trauma-informed educational practices, those challenges may be mitigated somewhat. I've shared just a few resources with you. The Stanford Pertz one is a very good one. And I think this lecture will be posted later today, probably at some point on YouTube and on the NAEMSE channel. But you can use those as much as you like. All of their resources are free and readily available for you to use. I have also included my email address on here for you. You can jot that down. I'm more than happy for you to email me anytime. Maybe we can start a conversation. And if you want me to come to your classroom or your campus and talk about trauma-informed care, talk to your students about it. It's something I'm very passionate about. And sometimes talking to the students is the best people to talk to, because maybe they look at themselves and go, hey, that's me. That's me. Maybe I do need to talk to somebody. Maybe I do need to talk to a mental health counselor, because in this day and time, there's no stigma attached to talking to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Many, many people do it. They do it just because they feel like it helps them get through life day to day. Okay. All right. That's all I have. I appreciate you having me so much. It's always a pleasure to be here and to share with NAEMSE and with you. Should I stop sharing my screen now? Is that what I should do?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's totally fine. And then
Gotcha.
yeah, that was fantastic. We will jump into our Q&A here. So in the chat, somebody asked what movie was that? But it was after the Shameless clip. So
okay, so the first one was Good Will Hunting, and the second one was Shameless, and that's a series on HBO. Shameless is really a comedy, but they have some really poignant moments in there too, because the dad's an alcoholic, mom was out of the house, and it just shows what happens to those kids through there. But let me say this too, though, that I think it's Lindsay says this also reflective of our EMS community. Many EMS colleagues suffer the same issues. Amen, Lindsay. And I don't want this to sound negative. I'm not trying to be, but EMS is a strange animal. And the reason EMS is a strange animal, and I hope and I think you will agree with me, EMS does attract a small percentage of fringe people. Would you say that's fair? That we attract a certain subset of people into EMS that you really don't know how they wound up there. Okay. I mean, it's a strange phenomenon. You know, I work at a medical school and I work with a lot of PhDs and a lot of MDs and DOs, and they're very similar in their look on life, and they're very similar in their outlook on life and how they conduct themselves day to day. But in EMS, man, that spread is much greater, much wider too. I think it's just a much different world for sure. How transparent should you be about your own childhood? you know what? I'm going to say this to you. That's up to you. Honestly, that's up to you. I share my childhood with people all the time. My dad worked all the time. My mom had significant mental illness, and she died when I was 40. But she had a condition where she couldn't get out into society. So really, I didn't really have much of a relationship with my dad because he was always working. My mom was kind of disconnected because of her mental illness, and at that point in time, nobody got therapy. Nobody received help for it. But what that did for me, though, is it wanted me to be much more engaged as a father with my own children. So I like to tell the story. My wife and my son was a 440-meter guy in college. He ran track in college, and we drove 2.5 hours one time to see him run a 440 race. And if you know anything about a 440, it lasts less than 2 minutes. So we drove 2.5 hours to watch him run for 2 minutes. But I do say too, though, as adults, we all have our own decisions to make, our own choices to make. But when you ask what we should share transparently, as much as you feel comfortable with, I think students love for us to open up with them and say, I got problems too. You're not the only one. I've got my own problems. And I think opening up to students, sharing as much as you want, I think is absolutely fair. I really do. EMS and law enforcement, you're right, Diana. They are very similar personalities. I think all of us in EMS are at some level a type A personality. Wouldn't you agree? And I think type A personalities, you're going to have a lot of different variations on a theme. I think that's just expected that you're going to have that. But EMS and law enforcement do have a lot of things in common. I'm doing a lecture here at this conference tonight, and I'm actually talking about EMS doctrine and all the things in EMS that we do that scholarly research has proved is not what we should be doing, and again, that speaks to the culture of EMS. Is sometimes I think we don't see the forest for the trees, and we're not willing. It's like, for instance, when the Heart Association took bicarb out of the AHA protocols, everybody's like, well, I saved a life with bicarb one time. Well, did you really? Was it really the bicarb that did it? Because every study that the AHA has done has said that bicarb may be potentially harmful. It's not helpful, and it may be harmful, but we're still giving bicarb across the country because one time we got a cardiac arrest back with bicarb, we think. So we're kind of, I'm speaking about me too. We're kind of narrow-minded when it comes to things, and I think sometimes we may be a little narrow-minded about mental illness too. But to answer your question again, share with them whatever you feel comfortable sharing. The one thing I want you to do is to stay away from mirroring. Don't mirror their emotion. If they're angry, don't be angry. If they're excited, maybe be excited if it's a good thing. But if they're anxious, don't be anxious. I mean, it's just going to cause tension. It really is. But thank you, everybody. Listen, like I said, the email's up there. Engage with me. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to find out what part of the country you're from, and if it works out that I could come to your campus and talk to your staff and faculty about this, I'm more than happy to. My wife and I love to travel, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can, and then we can get fit into the schedule. So thank you so much for being here. It means a lot for me to take this time out of the middle of your day.
Not to interrupt you, I'm so sorry. There's one more question hiding in the Q&A if you have time.
Yeah.
So this was from Rachel. She asked, can you address briefly that some students may have trauma related to their past experiences in the classroom as a child? Is that different, and should we handle that differently?
And I think what you're saying is if they've had bad experiences in like grammar school and early education, maybe they had a teacher who was really mean. Is that basically what you're talking about? I think so. But the way that I would engage with that is, listen, here's what I think about you guys that are on here today. You're here today, and I'm not talking to you. The mere fact that you're here today means that you want to be a great educator. You want to help your students. And so you being here tells me you're on the right path. But what you want to be as an instructor and for these students, trauma problems or not, you want to be an instructor that's approachable, transparent, and trustworthy. That's it. Those three words: be approachable, be transparent, be trustworthy. You're not going to be perfect. You're not going to be perfect. Okay. And you're always going to make mistakes. But if you're always approachable, you're always trustworthy, and you're always transparent, you will be a solid, excellent instructor. I promise you that.
All right. I think that is the end of our questions.
All right.
Rick, thank you so much. That was a really fantastic presentation. And it seems everybody else agrees.
Well, I hope nobody was offended by the language. It really just has to be part of it because, you know, those kind of families talk like that. I mean, you know, when it's just the way it is. And so hopefully that didn't offend you. You're EMS people. It probably didn't. So, all right. Hey, thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you, Rick. And thank you everybody for joining us.
All right. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.